The morning sun painted the vast Montana plains in golden hues as three small figures walked slowly along the dusty road. Their bare feet kicked up tiny clouds of dirt with each step. The oldest child, Maria, was only 12 years old. She held the hands of her two younger siblings, 8-year-old Carlos and 6-year-old Sofia. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and their thin faces showed the signs of hunger and exhaustion. The children belonged to the Crow Nation, living on a reservation that had seen better days. Their grandmother, who had raised them after their parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, had fallen seriously ill. The tribal clinic had no medicine to help her, and the nearest hospital was 200 miles away. Without proper treatment, the doctor said she might not survive another week. Maria had heard stories about the wealthy rancher who lived in the big house beyond the hills. People called him Samuel Morrison, and they said he owned more land than anyone else in 3 counties. Some folks claimed he was mean and cold-hearted, caring only about his cattle and money. Others whispered that he had secrets from his past that made him avoid people from the reservation. But Maria didn't care about rumors. She only cared about saving her grandmother, the woman who sang them lullabies in the Crow language and told them stories of their ancestors. The woman who made sure they had food even when she went hungry herself. The woman who was now lying in bed, growing weaker each day. The children had walked for hours, starting before dawn. They had no car, no phone, and no money for a bus. Walking was their only choice. Their feet were sore and blistered, but Maria kept encouraging her siblings to continue. She promised them that everything would be okay once they reached the ranch. As they crested a small hill, they saw it in the distance, Morrison's ranch house. It was massive, with white columns and a wraparound porch. Green lawns stretched in every direction, and expensive cars sat in the circular driveway. The contrast between this luxury and their own poverty was striking. Carlos stumbled, his legs giving out from exhaustion. Sofia began to cry, saying she couldn't walk anymore. Maria's heart sank. They had come so far, but her siblings were too tired to continue. She looked at the grand house in the distance, then at her crying brother and sister. What would their grandmother do in this situation? Taking a deep breath, Maria made a decision. She would carry Sofia and help Carlos walk the rest of the way. It would be slow and difficult, but they had no choice. Their grandmother's life depended on reaching that house. "Listen to me," Maria said to her siblings in a gentle but firm voice. "Grandmother needs us to be brave. Just a little bit more, and we'll be there. I'll help you both." She lifted Sofia onto her back and took Carlos's hand. Step by step, they made their way down the hill toward the ranch. The house grew larger as they approached, and Maria could see workers moving around the property. Some were fixing fences, others were herding cattle. They all looked strong and well-fed, so different from the people on the reservation. As they walked up the long driveway, several ranch hands stopped their work to stare at the 3 children. Maria felt their eyes following them, but she kept walking. She had practiced what she would say to Mr. Morrison 100 times during their journey. She would be polite and respectful, explaining their situation clearly. Surely, a man with so much wealth would help a dying old woman. The front door of the house was enormous, made of dark wood with brass handles that gleamed in the sunlight. Maria set Sofia down and straightened her own torn dress as best she could. She wanted to look presentable when she met the rancher. But before she could knock, the door swung open. A tall, stern-looking woman in an expensive dress stood there looking down at them with disgust. Her name was Mrs. Henderson, the rancher's housekeeper, though the children didn't know this yet. "What are you dirty children doing here?" Mrs. Henderson snapped. "This is private property. You need to leave immediately." Maria's heart pounded, but she found her courage. "Please, ma'am, we need to speak with Mr. Morrison. It's about our grandmother. She's very sick and we need help." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew even colder. "Mr. Morrison doesn't have time for beggars from the reservation. Now get off this property before I call the police." Sofia began to cry again, and Carlos hid behind Maria. The long walk, the hunger, the exhaustion, and now this harsh rejection was almost too much to bear. But Maria had promised her grandmother she would try everything to save her. She couldn't give up now. "Please," Maria begged, tears starting to form in her own eyes. "We walked for hours to get here. Our grandmother raised us after our parents died. She's all we have left. The doctor says she'll die without proper medicine, and we have no money. We just need someone to help us get her to the hospital." Mrs. Henderson was about to slam the door when a deep voice came from behind her. "What's going on here, Mrs. Henderson?" The children looked up to see a man in his 60s stepping onto the porch. He was tall and weathered, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. This had to be Samuel Morrison, the wealthy rancher they had come to see. He was wearing expensive clothes and boots that probably cost more than the children's family spent on food in a year. Maria took a step forward, her heart racing. This was their chance, maybe their only chance. She had to make him understand how desperate they were. The fate of their beloved grandmother now rested in the hands of this powerful stranger. Samuel Morrison looked down at the three children standing on his porch. Their appearance told a story of hardship: torn clothes, bare feet covered in dust, and faces marked by exhaustion and worry. For a moment, something flickered in his blue eyes, but his expression remained stern. Mrs. Henderson quickly spoke up, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Mr. Morrison, I was just telling these children to leave. They're from the reservation, probably looking for a handout. I'll call security to escort them off the property." But Morrison raised his hand to stop her. His eyes stayed fixed on Maria, who was trying her best to stand tall despite her fear. There was something about her determination that reminded him of someone from long ago. "What's your name, child?" Morrison asked, his voice neither kind nor cruel. Maria swallowed hard and found her voice. "My name is Maria Crowfeather, sir. These are my brother Carlos and my sister Sophia. We came here because our grandmother is dying and we don't know where else to turn." Morrison's face showed no emotion, but inside, something stirred. The name Crowfeather meant something to him, though he hadn't heard it spoken in over 30 years. He studied Maria's face more carefully, looking for familiar features. "Your grandmother," he said slowly. "What's her name?" "Elena Crowfeather," Maria replied. "She's been sick for weeks, and the tribal doctor says she needs to go to the big hospital in Billings, but we have no money and no way to get there. She's been taking care of us since our parents died. She's the only family we have left." At the mention of Elena's name, Morrison's composure cracked for just a second. His eyes widened slightly, and he took a step backward. Mrs. Henderson noticed the change in her employer's behavior, but couldn't understand what was happening. Morrison was remembering a time 35 years ago, when he was a young man, poor and desperate, working as a farmhand for barely enough money to survive. He had been injured in an accident with a wild horse, thrown and trampled, left with a broken leg and internal injuries. The local doctor had refused to treat him because he couldn't pay in advance. As he lay in pain, certain he would die, an elderly Native American woman had found him. Elena Crowfeather had been much younger then, but already known as a skilled healer. She had taken him to her home on the reservation, treating his wounds with traditional medicines and modern supplies she had somehow obtained. For 3 weeks, she nursed him back to health, never asking for payment, never expecting anything in return. During his recovery, Elena had shared stories of her people, their struggles and their resilience. She had fed him when she barely had enough food for her own family. When he finally healed and prepared to leave, he had promised Elena that someday when he had the means he would repay her kindness. But life had taken him far from those promises. Morrison had struck oil on a piece of land he'd bought with borrowed money. That discovery led to wealth beyond his wildest dreams. He had purchased more land, built his empire, and gradually separated himself from his humble past. He had convinced himself that his success was entirely his own doing, pushing away memories of the woman who had saved his life. Now, looking at Elena's granddaughter, those memories came flooding back with overwhelming force. "Your grandmother," Morrison said quietly. "Does she still live in the old house by the creek?" Maria looked surprised that he knew where they lived. "Yes, sir. The blue house with the broken front step." "Do you know our grandmother?" Before Morrison could answer, Mrs. Henderson interrupted impatiently. "Sir, surely you're not going to waste time with these people. You have the Patterson meeting in an hour, and the bank representatives are coming this afternoon." Morrison turned to his housekeeper with a look that made her step backward. "Cancel my meetings," he said firmly. "All of them." "But sir," I said, "cancel them." His voice left no room for argument. Maria watched this exchange with growing hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wealthy rancher would help them after all. Carlos and Sophia looked up at their sister, sensing that something important was happening but not understanding what. Morrison looked at the children again, his mind racing. Elena Crowfeather had saved his life when he was young and desperate. Now her grandchildren stood before him, young and desperate themselves, asking for the same kind of help Elena had given him so freely all those years ago. "Mrs. Henderson," Morrison said, his voice steady but filled with an authority that brooked no defiance, "prepare the guest rooms. These children will be staying here tonight." "Staying here?" Mrs. Henderson gasped. "But sir, they're guests in my home," Morrison cut her off. "See that they're fed, bathed, and given clean clothes. And call Dr. Williams. Tell him I need him to make a house call to the reservation immediately." Maria could hardly believe what she was hearing. After all their fears and the long, difficult journey, this powerful man was actually going to help them. Tears of relief began to flow down her cheeks. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "Thank you so much," but Morrison wasn't finished. He was remembering more details about Elena, her gentle wisdom, her generous heart, her unwavering strength in the face of poverty and discrimination. An idea was forming in his mind, something that went far beyond just helping with medical bills. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "also call my lawyer. Tell him I need to see him first thing tomorrow morning. And contact the hospital in Billings. I want their best doctors standing by." As Mrs. Henderson hurried away, muttering under her breath about the disruption to their orderly life, Morrison knelt down to be at eye level with the three children. For the first time, his stern expression softened completely. "Don't worry," he told them gently. "We're going to take very good care of your grandmother. But first, let's take care of you three." The next few hours passed like a dream for the three children. Mrs. Henderson, despite her obvious disapproval, followed Morrison's instructions to the letter. She led them to beautiful guest rooms with soft beds and clean bathrooms. Maria had never seen such luxury: thick carpets, paintings on the walls, and windows that looked out over rolling green fields. While the children bathed and changed into clean clothes that Mrs. Henderson had somehow found for them, Morrison made phone calls. He spoke with Dr. Williams, the best physician in the county, arranging for immediate medical attention for Elena. He also called the hospital in Billings, ensuring that a room would be ready and that money would not be an issue for any treatment Elena might need. But Morrison's mind was working on something much bigger than medical bills. As he sat in his study, surrounded by photos of his successful ranch and business ventures, he couldn't stop thinking about the debt he owed Elena Crowfeather. It wasn't just about money. It was about the kindness she had shown when kindness was rare, the dignity she had given him when the world saw him as worthless. When the children came downstairs for dinner, they looked like completely different people. Clean, well-dressed, and properly fed for the first time in weeks, their natural beauty and intelligence shone through. Morrison watched them eat, noting how Maria made sure her younger siblings had enough before taking food for herself, just as Elena had always put others before herself. "Maria," Morrison said during the meal, "tell me about your life on the reservation. What are your dreams for the future?" Maria looked up from her plate, surprised by the question. "I want to become a teacher," she said quietly. "I want to help children learn to read and write, like our grandmother taught us. But I don't think I can go to college. We have no money and I need to take care of Carlos and Sophia." Carlos, his mouth full of food, added, "I want to be a doctor like the one who couldn't help grandmother. But I want to help everyone, not just people with money." Little Sophia, who had been quiet most of the evening, looked up with bright eyes. "I want to paint pictures of horses like the ones outside." Morrison listened to each child speak, and with every word, his resolve grew stronger. These weren't just any children asking for help. They were Elena's legacy, carrying her spirit of generosity and hope despite their circumstances. After dinner, Morrison drove the children to the reservation in his truck. The contrast between his wealthy ranch and the poverty of the reservation was stark. Many of the houses were in disrepair, and the roads were full of potholes. But Morrison noticed something else: the sense of community, the way people looked out for each other, the dignity that persisted despite hardship. Elena's house was small and weathered, but clean and filled with love. When they arrived, they found Dr. Williams already there examining the elderly woman. Elena was awake but very weak, her breathing shallow and labored. When Elena saw Morrison enter her home, her eyes widened with recognition and wonder. Even in her illness, she remembered the young man she had saved so many years ago. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you came back." Morrison approached her bedside, and for the first time in decades, tears filled his eyes. "Elena, I should have come back years ago. I should have kept my promise to repay your kindness." Elena smiled weakly and took his hand with her frail fingers. "You don't owe me anything, Samuel. Helping others is what we do. It's who we are." Dr. Williams finished his examination and pulled Morrison aside. "She's very sick," he said quietly. "Pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exhaustion. She needs immediate hospitalization and intensive care." "Even then, I can't guarantee." Morrison nodded grimly. "Do whatever it takes. Money is no object." Within an hour, an ambulance arrived. Not the basic emergency vehicle that usually served the reservation, but a state-of-the-art mobile medical unit that Morrison had arranged. Elena was carefully loaded inside, with Maria holding her grandmother's hand throughout the process. "I'm scared," Elena whispered to her granddaughter. "Don't be scared." "Grandmother?" Maria replied, trying to be brave. "Mr. Morrison is helping us. Everything will be okay." Elena looked past Maria to Morrison, who was standing nearby. "Samuel," she called softly. He came closer, leaning down to hear her words. "Promise me," Elena said, "that if something happens to me, you'll take care of my grandchildren. They have no one else." Morrison felt the weight of her request, understanding that she was asking for far more than medical help. She was asking him to become a guardian, a protector, a family for 3 children who would otherwise be alone in the world. "I promise, Elena," Morrison said solemnly. "I give you my word." As the ambulance pulled away toward Billings, Morrison stood with the 3 children, watching the red lights disappear into the darkness. Maria was crying quietly. Carlos was holding Sophia's hand tightly, and Sophia was asking when they would see their grandmother again. Morrison realized that his comfortable, isolated life was about to change forever. These 3 children were going to become his responsibility, whether Elena survived or not. The thought should have terrified him, but instead he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond his own success and wealth. "Come on," he said to the children. "Let's go home and wait for news from the hospital." The word home surprised even him. Somehow, in just one day, these children had changed everything. His mansion was no longer just his house. It was about to become their home too. And for the first time in 30 years, Samuel Morrison felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The hospital in Billings was a maze of white corridors and beeping machines, but Elena was receiving the best care money could buy. Morrison had insisted on a private room and the top medical team. For 3 days he stayed at the hospital with the children, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and eating cafeteria food, refusing to leave until Elena's condition stabilized. During those long hours, Morrison learned more about the children and their life with Elena. Maria told him stories of how their grandmother had taught them traditional Crow songs and dances, keeping their cultural heritage alive despite poverty and hardship. Carlos shared how Elena had helped him with his schoolwork every night by lamplight, never letting him give up even when the lessons were difficult. Sophia showed Morrison drawings she had made of Elena braiding her hair and telling bedtime stories. On the 3rd night, Dr. Richards, the lead physician, approached Morrison with good news. "She's turned the corner," he said with a smile. "The antibiotics are working, her breathing is much better, and her fever has broken. She's going to recover fully, but she'll need time and good nutrition to regain her strength." The children cried with joy when they heard the news. Elena was awake and alert when they visited her room, and though she was still weak, her eyes were bright and full of life again. "My brave grandchildren," Elena said as they gathered around her bed. "You saved my life by getting help." "It wasn't us, grandmother," Maria said. "It was Mr. Morrison. He paid for everything and stayed with us the whole time." Elena looked at Morrison with deep gratitude. "Samuel, you've repaid any debt you thought you owed me 100 times over. Thank you for saving an old woman's life." But Morrison had been thinking during those 3 days at the hospital, and he had made some important decisions. He pulled up a chair close to Elena's bed. "Elena," he said seriously, "I want to ask you something important. I know the reservation faces many challenges. Poor schools, lack of jobs, inadequate health care. What if there was a way to change that?" Elena studied his face carefully. "What do you mean?" Morrison took a deep breath. "I've been successful in business, but I've kept that success to myself. I want to use my resources to help the reservation. I want to build a new school, upgrade the clinic, create jobs, and provide scholarships for young people who want to go to college. Elena's eyes widened. Samuel, that would cost millions of dollars. I have millions of dollars, Morrison replied simply. And what good are they if they're just sitting in banks while children like Maria, Carlos, and Sophia can't get a proper education? The children listened to this conversation with amazement. They had come seeking help for their grandmother's medical bills, never imagining that their desperate journey would lead to something so much bigger. There's more, Morrison continued. I want Maria, Carlos, and Sophia to come live with me. Not because you can't care for them, but because I want to make sure they have every opportunity to succeed. Good schools, tutors, college preparation, everything they need to achieve their dreams, Maria gasped. Live with you? In your big house? If you want to, Morrison said. And Elena, you would be welcome too. There's plenty of room, and I could use someone to help me learn how to be a proper guardian to these children. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing this incredible offer. Finally, she spoke. Samuel, you don't owe us this much. This is far beyond repaying an old kindness. It's not about debt anymore, Elena. It's about doing what's right. These children have incredible potential. Maria could become an excellent teacher, Carlos could be a wonderful doctor, and Sophia could be a great artist. But they need opportunities that the reservation can't provide right now. Over the next few days, as Elena continued to recover, she and the children discussed Morrison's offer. It was difficult to imagine leaving the only home they had ever known, but the opportunities Morrison was offering were beyond anything they had ever dreamed possible. Maria was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Grandmother, if we lived with Mr. Morrison, we could get good educations and then come back to help our people. I could become a teacher and start better schools on the reservation. Carlos could become a doctor and provide good health care for everyone. Sophia could show the world the beauty of Crow art and culture. Elena smiled at her granddaughter's wisdom. You're thinking like a true leader, Maria, always considering how to help others. When Elena was finally released from the hospital, Morrison had a surprise waiting. He had spent the week renovating several rooms in his mansion, working with interior designers to create spaces that honored the children's Crow heritage while providing modern comfort. Each child had their own room, decorated with Native American art and featuring items that reflected their individual interests. More importantly, Morrison had met with his lawyers and financial advisors to establish the Crow Feather Foundation, named in Elena's honor. The foundation would focus on improving education, health care, and economic opportunities on the reservation, with an initial endowment of $50 million. The children were overwhelmed by these changes in their lives. In less than 2 weeks, they had gone from desperate poverty to a life of luxury and opportunity. But Morrison was careful to ensure they understood that their privileges came with responsibilities. This isn't just about giving you nice things, Morrison explained as he showed them their new rooms. It's about preparing you to make a difference in the world. I expect you to work hard in school, help others whenever you can, and never forget where you came from. Elena, now fully recovered and living in the beautiful guest suite Morrison had prepared for her, watched her grandchildren adapt to their new life with pride and wonder. She had raised them to be strong, kind, and generous, and those qualities shone even brighter in their new circumstances. As the sun set over Morrison's ranch that first evening with their new family complete, Elena found Morrison standing on the porch, looking out over his vast lands. You've given us more than we ever dreamed possible, Samuel, she said. Morrison turned to her with a smile. Elena, you gave me my life 35 years ago. Now you've given me something even more precious, a real family and a purpose worth living for. 6 months later, the changes at Morrison's ranch and on the Crow reservation were remarkable. The children had settled into their new life with enthusiasm and gratitude, but they had not forgotten their roots or their mission to help their people. Maria was excelling at the private school Morrison had enrolled her in, but every weekend she returned to the reservation to tutor younger children who were struggling with reading and math. Her teachers were amazed by her natural ability to explain difficult concepts in simple terms, and her patience with struggling students was extraordinary. Carlos had thrown himself into his studies with incredible determination. Morrison had arranged for him to shadow Dr. Williams during his visits to the reservation clinic, and the boy showed remarkable aptitude for medicine. He was already talking about specializing in rural medicine so he could better serve underserved communities. Sophia, the youngest, had discovered that the ranch's art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was amazed by her natural talent. Sophia's paintings of horses, landscapes, and traditional crow ceremonies were so beautiful that Morrison had arranged for her to have her first art show at a gallery in Billings. The proceeds would go toward art supplies for children on the reservation. But it was the changes on the reservation itself that truly showed the impact of Morrison's commitment. The Crow Feather Foundation had broken ground on a new community center that would house a modern library, computer lab, and tutoring center. The old clinic was being completely renovated and expanded, with new equipment and plans to attract more medical professionals to the area. Elena had become Morrison's closest advisor on foundation projects. Her deep understanding of the community's needs and her decades of experience helping families in crisis made her invaluable in designing programs that would truly make a difference. She split her time between the ranch and the reservation, serving as a bridge between Morrison's resources and the community's needs. The relationship between Morrison and the children continued to deepen. He had legally adopted all three of them, but their bond went far beyond paperwork. He attended every school event, helped with homework, and listened to their dreams and concerns with the attention of a devoted parent. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Maria made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been accepted to the summer program at Stanford University," she said proudly. "It's for high school students interested in education policy. If I do well, they might offer me early admission to their undergraduate program." Morrison beamed with pride. "Maria, that's wonderful. Stanford is one of the best universities in the country. But I'm not sure I should go," Maria continued, causing everyone to look at her in surprise. "Why not?" Elena asked. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity you need to achieve your dreams." Maria looked around the table at her family. "Because I'll be away for 2 months and there's so much work to do here. The new tutoring program at the community center is just starting, and the children need help." Morrison studied his adopted daughter's face, recognizing the same selfless spirit that had driven Elena to help others at her own expense. He understood that Maria was torn between her personal ambitions and her commitment to helping her community. "Maria," Morrison said gently, "do you remember what you told me about becoming a teacher? You said you wanted to learn everything you could so you could come back and build better schools." "Yes," Maria replied. "Then you need to go to Stanford. Every bit of knowledge you gain there will make you a better advocate for education on the reservation. The children here will benefit far more from your Stanford education than from you staying home this summer." Elena nodded in agreement. "Your grandfather used to say that sometimes the best way to help your people is to go out into the world and learn all you can, then bring that wisdom back home." Carlos, now 14 and increasingly mature, added his support. "Besides, Maria, Sophia, and I can help with the tutoring program. We've learned a lot from watching you work with the younger kids." Over the following weeks, as Maria prepared for her Stanford program, Morrison reflected on how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a lonely, isolated man whose only concern was increasing his wealth. Now he was part of a family that was actively working to transform an entire community. The local newspapers had started covering the foundation's work, bringing attention to the positive changes happening on the reservation. Other wealthy individuals in the region began reaching out to Morrison, asking how they could contribute to similar projects. The foundation's model was being studied by organizations across the country as an example of effective community development. But for Morrison, the most meaningful changes were the small daily moments of family life. Teaching Sophia to ride horses, helping Carlos build a model of the human circulatory system for his science fair project, listening to Maria practice her speech for the debate team, sitting on the porch with Elena in the evenings, planning new foundation initiatives while watching the sunset over the mountains. Mrs. Henderson, who had initially been so resistant to the children's presence, had become their fiercest protector. She now took pride in preparing their favorite foods, helping with school projects, and bragging about their achievements to anyone who would listen. One evening, as Morrison tucked Sophia into bed, she asked him a question that made him pause. "Mr. Morrison, I mean Dad," she said, still sometimes forgetting that he was now legally her father. "Before we came here, were you lonely?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "Yes, Sophia, I was very lonely. I just didn't realize how lonely until you and your brother and sister came into my life. I'm glad we got lost that day, Sophia said sleepily. Got lost? Morrison asked. When we were walking to find you. We took a wrong turn and had to walk extra far. I was crying because my feet hurt. But if we hadn't gotten lost, maybe we would have come to your house at a different time. And maybe you wouldn't have been home, Morrison smiled, realizing that what the children had seen as a misfortune had actually been part of what brought them all together. Sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as problems or accidents. I'm glad you got lost too, sweetheart, he said, kissing Sophia's forehead. Sometimes the best things happen when we least expect them. As he turned off the light and closed Sophia's door, Morrison could hear Maria and Carlos in the next room, working together on a presentation about reservation healthcare needs that Carlos was giving to his class. Elena was in her room, talking on the phone with community leaders about the Foundation's latest project. Mrs. Henderson was downstairs, preparing lunch boxes for the next day. His house, once empty and quiet, was now filled with the sounds of a family that had come together through an act of desperate courage by 3 small children who refused to give up on someone they loved. 5 years had passed since 3 desperate children walked up the long driveway to Samuel Morrison's ranch. Now the transformation was complete, not just of the children's lives, but of an entire community in the heart of a man who had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Maria, now 18, had indeed been accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship. But more importantly, she had spent her high school years developing innovative teaching methods that combined traditional Crow cultural education with modern academic subjects. Her senior project, a comprehensive plan for improving educational outcomes on Native American reservations, had been published in several educational journals and was being implemented in communities across the country. Carlos, at 16, had been accepted into a special pre-med program that would allow him to begin his medical studies early. He had spent every summer working at the reservation clinic, which was now a state-of-the-art medical facility thanks to the Crow Feather Foundation. His dream of becoming a doctor who served underserved communities was well within reach. Sophia, now 13, had become a celebrated young artist whose paintings were exhibited in galleries from Billings to New York City. But her greatest pride came from the art therapy program she had helped establish at the reservation's youth center, where she taught other children to express their experiences and dreams through painting and sculpture. Elena, now in her 70s but healthier than she had been in years thanks to proper nutrition and medical care, had become the Foundation's executive director. Her wisdom and deep understanding of community needs had made the Crow Feather Foundation a model for effective grassroots development work. The reservation itself was almost unrecognizable from the struggling community the children had left behind. The unemployment rate had dropped from 60% to 15%, as the Foundation had helped establish small businesses, a technology training center, and a cultural tourism program that brought visitors to learn about Crow history and traditions. The new schools were among the best in Montana, with teachers from across the country competing for positions there. But it was graduation day at the reservation high school that truly showed how far everyone had come. Morrison sat in the front row of the new auditorium, watching as Maria delivered the valedictorian speech to her graduating class. Her words were powerful and moving, speaking about the importance of education, community service, and never forgetting one's roots while reaching for the stars. 5 years ago, Maria said to the packed auditorium, my brother, sister, and I were 3 scared children who walked many miles to ask a stranger for help. We had no idea that our desperate journey would not only save our grandmother's life, but transform our entire community. We learned that day that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid. Morrison felt tears in his eyes as he listened to the young woman who had become his daughter in every way that mattered. Elena, sitting beside him, reached over and squeezed his hand. But we also learned something else that day, Maria continued. We learned that one person with the power to help others can change hundreds of lives. Mr. Morrison didn't just save our family, he saved our entire community by choosing to use his success to lift others up, rather than just accumulating more wealth for himself. The audience erupted in applause, and Morrison felt embarrassed by the attention. He had never wanted recognition for his work with the foundation. The satisfaction of seeing the community thrive was reward enough. After the ceremony, as families celebrated around them, Elena pulled Morrison aside for a private conversation. "Samuel," she said, "I have something important to tell you. The tribal council met last week, and they have decided to honor you with the name Standing Bear. It's a name given only to those who have shown exceptional courage and dedication to protecting and providing for the people." Morrison was deeply moved by this honor. In Crow tradition, receiving a native name was one of the highest forms of respect and acceptance into the community. "I don't deserve such an honor," Morrison said humbly. "Yes, you do," Elena replied firmly. "You stood up when we needed you most, and you've never sat down since. You've shown our people that there are good hearts in the world, and you've given our children hope for their futures." That evening, the entire family gathered on the ranch porch for their traditional Sunday dinner. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a feast, and even some of the ranch hands joined them, as had become the custom over the years. The distinction between employer and employee had long since blurred into something more like an extended family. As they sat around the large table Morrison had built to accommodate their growing circle, Carlos made an announcement. "I got my acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins Medical School," he said with a huge grin. "Full scholarship, and they're interested in my research proposal about rural healthcare delivery systems." The table erupted in cheers and congratulations. Morrison felt the familiar surge of pride he experienced whenever one of his children achieved a milestone. "That's wonderful, son," Morrison said. "Johns Hopkins is one of the finest medical schools in the world." "I know," Carlos replied. "And in 8 years, when I'm Dr. Carlos Morrison, I'm coming back here to run the clinic and establish a medical school satellite program. We're going to train doctors right here on the reservation." Sophia, not to be outdone by her older siblings, had her own news to share. "The Smithsonian Museum wants to include my painting series about Crow creation stories in their Native American art exhibition next year. And they want me to be there to talk about my work." Morrison marveled at how these 3 children, who had once been so desperate and scared, had grown into confident, accomplished young people who were determined to use their success to help others. As the evening wound down and the children went inside to do homework and prepare for the week ahead, Morrison and Elena remained on the porch enjoying the peaceful Montana evening. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Giving up your quiet, simple life for all this chaos and responsibility?" Morrison considered the question, looking out over the ranch where children's laughter now frequently filled the air, where the bunkhouses had been converted into guest quarters for visiting foundation staff and volunteers, where his once pristine lawns now bore the happy scars of soccer games and art projects. "Elena," he said finally, "I thought I was living before you and the children came into my life. But I wasn't really living at all. I was just existing. Accumulating things that didn't matter. Avoiding connections that might have made life meaningful. The day Maria, Carlos, and Sophia walked up my driveway was the day my real life began." Elena smiled, understanding completely. "They changed all of us, didn't they? Even me. I thought my job was just to keep them safe and fed. I never imagined I would live to see them graduate from college or achieve their dreams. The best part," Morrison added, "is that this is just the beginning. Maria will revolutionize education, Carlos will transform healthcare in rural communities, and Sophia will use art to bridge cultures and heal hearts. The foundation will continue growing and helping more communities. The ripple effects of what started with 3 brave children will spread far beyond anything we can imagine." As if summoned by their conversation, Maria appeared in the doorway. "Dad, Grandmother, are you coming in? Carlos wants to show everyone his acceptance letter, and Sophia has a new painting to unveil." Morrison and Elena exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Their quiet moment was over, but that was exactly how they wanted it. Their lives were no longer quiet, and they wouldn't have it any other way. "We're coming," Morrison said, standing and offering Elena his arm. As they walked toward the house filled with light and laughter, Morrison reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. 3 desperate children had walked up his driveway 5 years ago, seeking help for their dying grandmother. They had saved her life, but in the process they had saved his soul. The wealthy rancher who had once lived in isolation, caring only for his own success, was gone forever. In his place stood a father, a community leader, and a man who had learned that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you gave away and the lives you touched along the way. Samuel Morrison, now known to the Crow people as Standing Bear, had indeed been shocked by what 3 little children could accomplish when they refused to give up on love. But the biggest shock of all was discovering that in helping them, he had found the family and purpose he never knew he was missing.